I'm so pleased to be here. I'm Audrey Selian from Rianta Capital, and I'm here today with Antonio, Lubna, and Steven to talk about the nuances of the artisan sector, the importance, the impact, and overall general state of the market when it comes to the representation of artisanal innovation in this realm of impact that we are here to look at and discuss. And I'm not going to talk a lot. I can only speak from the funder perspective. I work for a single-family office of Indian origin that focuses on capitalizing social enterprises in India. And among those social enterprises that we've put some patient capital into are artisanal digital e-commerce platforms and one or two such businesses. So I can only speak from that perspective. But the beauty of this morning is that I'm here today with folks who have deep knowledge and engagement in these models. And we know that generally this is a pretty undercapitalized part of the impact market. And at the same time, it's also one of the most kind of deep impact, kinds of models that one can have in terms of engaging really folks from across the spectrum of the underserved. So I'd like for us to be able to speak to the state of the market a little bit. We want to encourage your interaction, your questions, your comments. We want to know who's in the room. So we will have an extended Q&A towards the end of the session as well. Please feel free to raise your hands. I'd like to ask each of us to share a little bit about respective backgrounds, starting with Antonio, moving over to Lubna, and then Steven has slides and is going to share kind of a deeper view of his work in the African context. So let's begin with Antonio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Antonio. I'm one of the founders of Someone Somewhere. It's a brand that works with artisans from Mexico, and we help them become part of the value chains of big brands with sustainable materials. In the last couple of years, we've done more than 20 million products with artisans for companies like Adidas, Apple, Delta Airlines, and we've been in the space for around 8 years, but even more since we started working with artisans. So very happy to be here and share more about our work and how has it been to raise funding, what are the different options that exist, etc.
Thank you.
Lubna. I'm Lubna Dajani. I'm founder of Allternet and the Allternet Living Labs. And I'm also the co-chair of the US chapter of Catalyst 2030. My daughters are both artists. I think I'm a closet artist. And over the years, I've worked on, I believe that art is the way we express the best, the worst, and the innovative in humanity. And it is the way, if we're going to change anything, it's through the arts that we will. I always say, make art, not war. And over years, I've worked with women that have gifts. We all have a gift to share, and whether they are making crafts of sorts, whether it's weaving baskets, whatever the art is, and we've helped them scale that through a digital platform where they would be able to make a living for their families, and at the same time for the people who are buying the art rather than the gifts, rather than just buying a gift that is anybody else you can buy anywhere, that you're buying something that is handmade, that is unique and special, and that comes with a little bit of story about the culture, so that we can start to know each other from each other rather than through media or what have you. But why talk about all that myself when we have someone here with us? Steven will tell us a lot more about that in detail. So I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you so much for being here. He's just made it all the way from Uganda. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm called Steven Rwagweri. I'm from Uganda. I'm a social innovator in the artisan sector. I'm the founder of African Continental Crafts, a social enterprise in the field, and a designer of the model we call traditional artisan inclusion model, meant to be scalable across Africa. Also, my background have been in the non-profit sector for many years, through which I have grown up to a level of being a global facilitator and UNESCO's facilitator in ICH. Right away, I go to the subject of today, artisanal sector in impact investing, a blind spot of unexplored potential. This topic, the moment we talk about artisan sector, there are deficiency adjectives that are associated. Something comes unexplored, undiscovered, underrepresented, unnoticed. These adjectives are very much associated with the artisan sector. If you want to think about it closely, what is it that is underrepresented or underdiscovered? Impact potential. A lot of potential to bring of impact in the sector is underdiscovered. A lot of new insights that need to be brought on board, new perspectives, new possibilities, new opportunities which the sector needs to be, which the sector has and have not been brought to light. To achieve what? All these to achieve what? To achieve universal economic inclusion. We take pride in this expression that under our model, traditional artisan inclusion model, we have brought this expression as part of as an added concept in the impact terminologies. The sector has got capacity to drive universal economic inclusion because of its inherent potential to bring all people who are disempowered into the market economy, all people who are resource deprived, like the stateless, the landless, those who cannot access land, the refugees. The sector has got capacity to reach all those and bring them to the income economy. And research and case studies have shown that through different efforts which have been done. Equalization of productivity. The sector can equalize productivity. This is where we can see an old lady of 90s becoming productive and competing with an industrialist, a manufacturer, because they are both providing or creating a product or a good that can go to the market. Reclaiming productivity. Some of these categories of the population could have lost capacity to produce or to be productive, but the sector can reach them. Reclaiming social relevance. When you see an old lady or somebody who has been chronically sick and losing hope because he cannot contribute to the social phenomenon, but the sector can reach that person and restore that social relevance. Providing therapy. Case studies have shown that the sector, even people who are in pain, psychological, physical, whatever, crafting, handmade, can act as a very therapeutic in so many ways. This is a case study that we could see and reflect on a number of things. One social entrepreneur uses crafting to provide social, spiritual, economic, and physical recapitulation to people living with HIV/AIDS in Uganda. But he must adopt international hawking in search for sympathy buyers. This brings out the concept of the sector being neglected to develop its market potential around the world that are potential, yet the product are potentially market competitive if innovation, policy, and impact investment were enabling. This case study summarizes it all, the potential of the sector and the gaps in impact investment. What are these unexplored potentials? Universality. The sector is universal from everywhere and everybody. That universality concept aspect has not been explored to drive universal inclusion. Maximum adaptability to limitations. It is the only sector that can adapt to physical, technical, literacy, digital limitations of different communities, different groups, demographics. And that potential is unique. That has not been explored. The first and basic livelihood skill. This is a livelihood skill universally that we are born with. We don't go to training and school. It is passed on from generation to generation informally. A fallback position when physical and technical vibrance fails. You and I, at one time, we can lose our physical vibrancy. You get accident, you become incapacitated, you grow old. But this is the sector that can recapitulate you. It is a fallback position for you to remain on board in terms of productivity and compete with industrialists. Driving gender balance, you can't say this, we can't talk much. Intersection of critical impact sectors. When you look at all these critical impact sectors, it brings them together. It's a joint. Talk of livelihood, talk of entrepreneurship, youth issues, gender issues. It is a point that brings all this. All these are potentials that have not been explored in the sector. A springboard of grassroots-based innovations. You see, it is a center where a human being maximizes imaginations and creativity. And because of that, if that was explored, it could promote grassroots-based innovations, which we talk about, that now are driving development. Nature and human friendliness. It's a sector that balances, maximizes friendliness between human action and nature. There are no fights. We don't exploit human being. You don't exploit the environment when you are doing crafting. Then commercial viability. It is commercially viable. Case studies have been tested everywhere. We can bring so many. Unlike what people think that it is not. Now, undesired sector conditions. Despite all that potential, the sector faces the following. Predominantly crafted in the biggest program you find is country-based specific programming, but not transnational. Standalone, micro, and often sporadic transnational initiatives. That has characterized the sector. That's the undesirable condition of the sector. Category 2, predominantly served with petist attitude. Something, which is not mine. Tokenism, charity and sympathy. because of misunderstanding the sector, our minds have associated it with petism. Something secondary, something you forget about, something that you just bring, and yet it has got all the strength. You know, handout-based funding models, it doesn't go into the mainstream budgeting. It is something handout. And we have been calculating all the world donors, the model of the money that goes into the sector is handout, not the mainstream budgeting. Marginalization in policy making. Now, the desired sector condition, transnational comprehensive models. We need to come up with a sustainable, comprehensive, and transnational models. A few examples are mentioned here, 3 of them. Made 51 by UNCHR had done a lot of work. 6C framework by Creative Million. There are a few, but we need to bring more. And what we have developed as African Continental Craft, Traditional Arts and Inclusion Model. These show that it is possible to create a transnational, sustainable, and comprehensive model which can attract bigger funding and therefore shared impact. Sustainable and comprehensive impact funding, that's where we need to go, which can be in the form of philanthropy and grants for capacity development, social loans and equity for digital marketing and trade. From PBP, they tell us the sector is estimated at the moment to be 1 trillion worth and growing at 20% per year. Therefore, this is not a sector to ignore. With this, I think these ideas have raised your reflections, and I invite more discussions. I thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for laying that out so beautifully. I think this is a great overview of, indeed, the blind spots, some of the opportunities, the way that we think about this sector, and the opportunities therein. Antonio, do you have thoughts to add from your perspective, from your region, from Mexico?
Sure. Thank you very much, Stephen. That was amazing. And I think he already covered why the sector is so important. A few other data points. There are 300 million artisans around the world, and the vast majority live in poverty, and the vast majority are women. So it's one of the sectors with the most impact or deep impact potential that exists. And one big problem or a big obstacle is that the way for this sector to become a part of the global conversation again is, in my opinion, that sustainability is also becoming a very important factor in decision making for more and more people and companies. And this is one of the most sustainable ways that exists to make product. So in our case, there's been a very interesting shift. We've been trying to make large companies understand and realize that if they work with artisans, they can have a very big impact. And the moment we started to also explain how this sector could be one of their tools, or maybe their biggest tool to solve their sustainability issues, is when we started to see the spark again, and companies realizing like, oh, okay, I desperately need to find ways of changing my value chain and of making products in a more sustainable way. And there's already 300 million artisans who make products from materials they find in their own communities, make them in a very clean way, because a lot of times they work with their hands or with tools that don't pollute at all. So I think if we are able to connect all of this universe of artisans around the world with the global need for more sustainable products, that's the bridge that can help us create way more opportunities and impact. And I think the other obstacle we faced was or has been that it's a little bit counterintuitive, the idea of making a lot of product in a rural village with artisans that live in their homes. But once we started having the first, the second examples of companies making millions of products with artisans, that idea is starting to be changed, and it's proven that it's possible if you have the right infrastructure. So I feel there's a very interesting path in the next years, maybe until 2030, where all companies are looking to decarbonize their supply chains, where this sector can get re-energized and create millions of job opportunities for artisans. And as Stephen was saying, this is a sector that equalizes opportunities. No, we work with villages that don't. We are based in Mexico, and it's probably one of the only sectors that can provide fair and consistent jobs to indigenous women who don't speak Spanish even, or that are in the middle of the jungle. Or we've even had cases where a village was invaded by the next village, and the artisans, we don't know how, were still able to send their products our way. So it's extremely resilient once they have the opportunity. And I think SOCAP is a conference about capital and how to connect impact capital to the right opportunities. And I think, again, if in our case, we've been able to raise capital from both impact investors and even VCs. And the key was showing them the amount of dormant capacity that exists, and how, if you build the right bridges, it can become also a huge business opportunity. We have funds that didn't invest because of the impact. They like it, but the reason was they saw a very clear opportunity to have a pretty big return on their investment. And also, I think a trend we are seeing and that we are trying to tap into and be good at explaining is right now there's so much funding for climate companies, climate tech. A lot of it goes to energy, a lot of it goes to innovative materials, for example. But most companies that are getting into the space and trying to find solutions, they tell us that there's already, for example, very interesting materials that are sustainable, but once they get into the details, they cost 10 times more than what exists, and the capacities are 10 times smaller than what they need. And when they talk with us and we show them how we are making products with recycled materials, and that, to give you a reference, just with the artisans we are working with, we can cover Central Park with fabric every month. So when they start understanding this capacity, and also that the price, once you have economies of scale, works very well, it starts to help understand that this can be part of the climate conversation. And a lot of the funding we've received recently is from funds that they also invested in a company making leather from mushrooms, or a biotech company, and we are a different type of bet, but trying to get into the same opportunity. So I think just a few thoughts. I'm sure you have a lot more.
Thank you. I would love to know how many of you here with us are investors or artisans yourselves, or technologists, or just maybe by investors? Great, we have something for you. Artisans? Yeah. Wow. And the tech? And the rest? Interested people. Yeah, and because, I mean, I really, it's amazing, because I also think, you know, artisan and craft is really the most. It's a universal language. Like art, like music, is a universal language, and it's not free of innovation or technology because, like he described, I have another friend of mine who makes enormous sculptures. You should see the pictures of them. They look like the most amazing paintings, but they're made out of either plastic bottles or discarded computers or what have you. And they're enormous sculptures that look beautiful and that are articulating the message in the most beautiful way. And I imagine when artisans can be a beautiful addition to anything, whether we're talking about agriculture or agri-tech. We weave a basket. The young students in the university who are working on tech and sensors, you can weave the sensors into the baskets. The baskets now can carry the fruits that are, or the crop, whatever that may be. And now you have smart baskets that bridge the old with the young, that bring out the culture and that give you the traceability. I think we need to open our minds to how artisans can really put a beautiful face to humanity, to bring back the humanity. But you invest in artisans and art-related products.
Not exclusively. We are an impact investor that has invested equity in specifically in a business called Mela Artisans in India that has worked very hard to provide strong design curation into a product mix, mostly homeware, houseware, kind of stuff like that, frames, pillows, those kinds of things. It's been a very honestly, it's been a very difficult investment. The product is beautiful. The impact is material. We have incredible metrics that show the improvements on livelihoods for the artisans. But COVID almost killed this business, right? There were containers coming from India. We had demurrage fees that, rocked up into, nearly $1 million. Exactly enough to kill a business like this. And it's just through the resilience and perseverance of the entrepreneur that this business hasn't folded. And we're a very large investor in this business by now. And the focus is on, the leveraging digital e-commerce platforms. They realized quickly that, and this is one of the tensions I'd like to ask about. You work so hard to create beautiful products. You have all these people that you're working with and you're using all the right sorts of materials, sustainable materials. The big challenge is you have to work on your brand. How is your brand visible? So these folks put all this money into the brand and then realized quickly that the direct-to-consumer sales is like nothing. It's negligible. It's nothing. So they were like, okay, well, we have to sell on Amazon. Well, yeah, then you enter the Amazon algorithms and you have to time your warehouse, cycles with what Amazon expects, and they're super extractive. Super extractive, right? And the problem is, I think so many of these artisanal, these platforms, these beautiful platforms that are created are struggling with that tension of having to focus on spending money on a competing brand. I mean, we're sponsoring a conference for the first time in India in this December, called the Kula Conclave, run by a platform called 200 Million Artisans. And there are a couple of 100 million artisans and everybody's competing on brand. How on earth can we as investors, as providers of patient capital, think tactically as a network to think about how we can best support the visibility of these projects without each one having to spend and raise its own money on its own branding? So I'd like to ask Stephen a little bit more about his perspective on this issue, because you have a platform. I mean, yours is African content. I mean, the way you frame it is broad. How is that addressed? And curious to hear thoughts from all of you guys. What's your perspective on this? How do we invest in this intelligently? What kind of money should be going into this? We've tried equity, and the company's still alive, so thumbs up. We have to transcend the narrative of the charity and the grant and just the handout, as you said. What's the right way to invest in this? How can we support, better collaboration and visibility in the funding community to support and elevate what you're doing?
Yes, thank you very much. To bring that point from the point of investors, our assessment from experience from the few case studies we have done show that the sector needs a lot of, for it to be beneficial, needs capacity development. And if initially it is taken 100% commercially, it may not be viable, because you need to first build the capacity of the artisans. And our approach in the African continental craft, we emphasize philanthropy, impact investing, to build the capacity to concentrate on capacity development, and then equity to come in aspect of trade and digital marketing. But without capacity development supported by philanthropy or whatever, you cannot, the sector cannot be very commercially viable if you approach it right from the capacity development and marketing. You combine them and then expect to be commercially viable, it becomes a problem. And that's why our approach of the model, traditional arts and inclusion, it is comprehensive. It attracts the impact, the entire impact ecosystem to come and join the artisan value chain in terms of empowering the artisans, and then the commercial aspect come at the top. The entire ecosystem must be in.
I have a couple thoughts there. On the marketing side, we also, our journey was, I'm sure, super similar to a lot of other artisan brands. We know Mela very well, and it's a beautiful brand. And our first approach or idea was to create a direct-to-consumer brand. We thought we would only sell online first, only in our website, and eventually realized that the amount of budget we needed in marketing for people to come to the website was huge. Then we started opening a few physical stores that were in the places where people already were at, and that worked better, but it requires capital to open the store. And I think the main or the inflection point was when we realized we are very good at creating products. We can make products very well, and at telling the stories of the people who make them. And we, luckily, I think we're good at branding and creating a brand, but it would be impossible for us to be great at everything. So at one point, we realized that a very interesting path could be co-branding, in which we partner with way bigger brands with way bigger budgets, and we put a lot of focus on ensuring everything we do together is co-branded. And that has allowed, like, now there's 20 million people that have someone somewhere branded products in their hands, but we've spent $0 in marketing because it's all through these partnerships. And for the companies that work with us, it's also a very powerful model, because if they try to do this by themselves, people may not believe the products were made by artisans fairly with the right materials. And when it's a co-branded partnership, people already start getting that that's the case, no? So I think this combination of brands or companies that are based in the countries where artisans work, but that can connect to the Adidas and the Ralph Laurens and the Ikeas of the world, can be a very powerful way of making it work. And I think my point of view, there's a lot of different ones, is the capacity is there. There's so much capacity. What is really lacking is demand. Once we have a demand for a project, a partnership, a product, we've been able to scale up the production of communities like crazy without so much work. What they told us is, we've always been able to do this. We never had the opportunity to do it. And we are already in communities that receive more than $1 million per year for their products, and they told us we could do 10 times more, just bring us the opportunities. So I think that's a very important focus point, that it's not that, like, I think capacity building is important and helps, and maybe a good philanthropic investment, but we may also need to change this idea that artisans can't do it. They can, and they are way smarter than us, and once they get the chance, they prove they can do it. It's more, how do we connect them to the global market and the companies that... We are working with companies that spend $2 billion per year buying textile accessories, and artisans can do $200 million of those if they get the opportunity. So I think that may be a very interesting approach to it.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, streamlining those linkages and facilitating, opening the doors to it's relationships. It's just finding the right buyer, the right person at the right company, and the right platform most of the time. And it's incredibly obscure if you're far off and don't have the social capital. We can very happily start a Q&A here. Anybody have thoughts, questions, things to share specific to this topic, or adjacent issues and concerns about these types of models?
Audrey, I want to address your question about the competition amongst other artisans and like branding. I ran a social enterprise working with marginalized women in India, giving them a fair wage to hand make organic baby blankets and accessories, and carried in over 250 stores globally. And we faced that supply chain issue exactly. We had to dissolve our company in 2021. Yeah. And all the questions that you're talking about, I've resonated with, and I've been like mulling through that challenge. And I think if we look at it from a whole entire ecosystem perspective, I'm curious and wondering, like, where might there be opportunities for us to think about consolidation, like the large conglomerates, like LVMH? They have leveraged like all their different like intellectual like capacity and property into one place so that they could share and learn. So what might it look like for an artisan sector to do the same thing? Can an investor think that way and say there's such a huge opportunity to do this, and if we could just put everybody together in the same room to leverage that, like, can we do that? And I think that when it comes to competition, none of us want to compete with each other. We want to like continue to do good for each other. So is there a space for that? Is there an investor that's willing to say, oh, I believe that? Is there a way to consolidate? Is there a way for us to think about it in that very much bigger meta narrative? Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in that call to action to the community of practice of funders and investors who would be willing to step forward and think together about how to support that kind of ecosystem where, I mean, of course, there on some level you're competing to get into a particular distribution channel, and in particular, I mean, whether it's Mela Artisans was doing distributions in everything from Bloomingdale's to TJ Maxx, trying to show up and have their product. I mean, there is that competitive element, but ultimately, they're about the impact story in their supply chain, and it's about the people that you're sourcing from and how you're giving them visibility and access. There have got to be more innovative ways to support the access and that visibility, and the challenges you're articulating as a practitioner. Curious, has anyone seen unique? I mean, what's been the funding history, Stephen, from your perspective, in terms of has it all been? How have you been able to start? How have you been able to continue to procure and source and support? What's your view on the ideal sort of investment structure to support what you do?
Yes, the one thing that we need to recognize is that just as there are various products in artisan sector, so many, also the capacity of artisans is varied. There are those who don't need much capacity support. There are those who are at a level that they can even compete in business. And if we don't recognize that and we come with a blanket policy of approaching them, then there are challenges. For us, the model of African continental craft, its focus is the most incapacitated, the most disadvantaged.
That's the impact, really deep impact story to underserved.
Yes, you just identify the most disadvantaged, the most incapacitated, and you raise them up to equally compete. We have had a situation like at home we compare Kenya and Uganda. Kenya has made over time as a country a lot of investment to develop the sector. And maybe Uganda has done less. Now what happens, the products of the Kenyan communities are what are marketed in Uganda. And then the heritage of the indigenous communities in Uganda are outcompeted. So that's the whole point of that. If you are approaching the same thing in terms of investment at the same level, or you are looking at them from the same equalization, then you miss a point. We have a community which, well, the buyers, they come, they say, we need this particular product. If you can produce it, the market, then we shall buy. But then that particular product is picking it from a particular community in some country who have invested and brought their heritage to the limelight, to be recognized by the investor, the market. And then he's bringing that product which has been developed elsewhere and imposing others to forget their heritage and adopt this product or this style and heritage. You know, style, heritage, design, style, heritage, materials, they are related with people's spirituality, people's heritage, and people's values. So if we are saying that we need to develop, we need to look at all these variations which are there in the community and the kind of response that we need to provide in terms of capacity and investment.
You know, I'm just sitting here getting inspired, thinking, you know, every country has products that they produce, and all companies have packaging, and I think there's a lot of waste in that, and I'm reminded of a company that I had small investment in. It's a woman that chemist that she makes makeup, and now all of her packaging is in the packaging itself is made by women that are artisans that are making beautiful little sachets that are putting the makeup in that you can actually use after, and it's not a throwaway. And I think maybe we need to start creating this whole new channel of replacing packaging with art that can be work that expresses the culture of even the community or the country that this art is the product is made of, or that it's going to. So it could be maybe packaged locally with through the work of artisans. I'm not sure. What do you think about that? But I'm starting to think we need to eliminate a lot of waste that's in I say systemic waste, not just the waste that goes in the garbage, but in this case,
no, certainly.
In this case, I think it's a double.
I think the packaging and design, the packaging aspects of this also bear huge, opportunity in terms of the sustainability. More and more people care about these things now.
Yeah.
On the consumer level, the brand level, kind of storytelling. We know how evocative it is, how important it is. Sometimes with certain things we buy, we get, a picture of somebody who made it.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference. I think the consumers do tend to care, especially the youngers today, do tend to care more. But we are still in an environment where fast fashion and retail and mass market still dominates hugely. So the key is, I think, to find hooks into determining how to make those large procurers care, to be able to source at volumes that make sense for them. And from our side, on the mission investing, impact investing side, to be able to say, okay, Here's how we'd like to capitalize this with all the capacity support requirements that may be mandatory in certain communities where you want to be able to not only put in the money for the OPEX of the business, but to support the training, the capacity development, the education pieces, the outreach. I mean, many times your companies are building the plane as you're flying it. You're doing everything at once, and it requires all kinds of money, including grant. And so, the question is, how do we streamline these elements and showcase the use cases and the examples so that others can learn from, shared experience? And I know if we look out there, we have a certain number of people in the room. In the SOCAP, I don't know how many people are attending SOCAP this year. A couple thousand? Usually it's a couple thousand. There's at least a couple of dozen that are, represent a community of practice of investors who care about this specifically. So if we could get them all in one room and talk about their pipeline, their projects, their experiences in terms of what kind of money's gone into what parts of these types of structures, that's the only way from my perspective to deal with this blind spot. Because we're all doing stuff in silos and it's not visible. We're not able to share this experience of why did this company fold under this type of pressure? What sort of funding would have supported you at that critical moment when it could have made a difference? Very difficult. And, there's a huge spectrum of capital to look at. I don't know if you'd like to reflect on
I think
that, Antonio.
That is an amazing idea. I feel or at least we haven't heard of initiatives to connect all the investors and philanthropic organizations interested in the space with people working in the space to share learnings and to connect with each other. I think that's brilliant. I think one very interesting approach we are seeing is, I think companies, when they understand the impact, 90% of them would love to work with artisans. Once they get it, we haven't encountered any buyer that tells us, no, that's horrible, I don't want to impact people. The problem is that usually it involves a little bit more work on their part at the beginning, a little bit more risk, particularly if it's a new brand that hasn't the reputation yet. And sometimes, at least to start, it's a bit more expensive. It's not the same to make 1 million products with polyester in a factory in China that is subsidized than working with artisans to make them. But the difference is not crazy. The problem is with these large companies, if they buy a product for 10, moving to buy it for 11, it's part of their budget and it affects their KPIs. So an approach we are seeing and that we are promoting a lot is we are seeing a lot of partnerships between the procurement teams who normally have most of the budget and the sustainability team or the foundation of the company to combine the $10 that the procurement team already is paying with $1 from the sustainability team or the foundation or even an external capital or grant provider. And that can make a huge... I think that the value that dollar generates as activator of the other $10 is huge. So I think that could be a great path. And even we are building this with some companies where it's not forever. It's give us 1 year, 2 years where you buy this for 11 instead of $10. And once we have a steady flow of orders, we can work to find some efficiencies in the cost of a material, the logistics cost, etc. But that is what allows us to start working together and to make it also very easy for the buyers to do it, because they're like, if I'm going to spend the same $10, but this is having impact and is more sustainable, let's do it. So I feel that could be a more creative way of approaching it.
I think also I'm inspired to think that I think there's an education that needs to happen here across the board. And I think I always say we need to extend access and reach, but we need to shift where we place emphasis and how we measure value. When we talk about de-risking, I think if we take a look at the line items and where that money is being spent in that $10, whether it's a packaging or whatever else, and its impact on the environment, its impact on society, and where does that spend end up? Is it in the garbage or what? Versus if you shift how you measure, and then maybe it's that $10 has an impact of a lot more negatively than $10. And if we change how we measure value, then maybe we can, instead of it being de-risking, it's going with the artisan is a way to de-risk, is a way to reduce your costs, in fact, because you are reducing your own carbon footprint or and increasing your impact. So we need to shift into thinking about the field of effect of our behaviors and our spend. And we will immediately see, I'm sure it won't take very long to take a pen and paper, do the math, that going this way will be more true to your cause, more true to your, and better to your bottom line. That's, in my opinion, anyway. What do you think?
Yes, I remembered something from his submission, which we need to do in the sector. That is to increase the capacity of networking and sharing. For example, if we are to develop this sector, that is a very important component of sector development. Like now, when we are seated here, I'm from Africa, and he's from the other part of the world, Mexico, and he's sharing their level of development and their challenges. I'm learning a lot. And this is the area we discover in the sector that we don't have sufficient mechanisms of networking and sharing. I think that is for us who are implementers, or the ecosystem in general should reflect on creating mechanisms and platforms of sector coordination, sector networking and sharing.
Yeah. Yes. The lady
Please.
and then the gentleman.
I'm curious, what would you look for on such a platform or space? Like, what are components of networking you would like to see, which you think would be successful?
I think the question is...
I would like to ask Antonio and Stephen from a practitioner, entrepreneur perspective. From an investor perspective, I want to see deal flow. I want to see beautifully profiled, robust, assessments of like, who's the team, how is it governed, what are they producing, who are they selling to, who's the previous history of funding. That's what I would like to see. But from the...
I thought you were going to say deal flow and exits.
No, exits later. But like that, just to be able to see, okay, who's doing what, who's funded what, and what can we do as a patient impact investor looking at XYZ place. But what is your perspective on like, what would benefit you practically on such platforms?
So we have a platform for collaboration and sharing. What would be the benefit?
What would be on it?
Yes, you see, like any other sector, first of all, there is a need for innovations in the sector. And right from the production sector, the production part of it, we need a lot of learning. We need a lot of inspiration from different case studies from other people with good practices. Also we need to network with the impact investment. The impact investing sector, they need to interact with with the producers or the practitioners in artisan sector, because if they don't appreciate or understand it, they may not appreciate it because they don't know what strength that is there. So when we come together in networking, we build our case, we build our voice, we sensitize ourselves and then sensitize others.
Thank you. Antonio, any reflections? We have time for one more question after this.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I imagine a space where there's leaders of different artisan-driven brands, companies, and the impact investors interested in the space all in one place at the same time would be, I think a challenge we have is we are a very global industry, what makes it hard to meet that often. But if maybe once per year there was a SOCAP where everybody could go and where I think any entrepreneur could look for a sponsor to take them there if it becomes a place where you will find these opportunities. I think in our case, it's one obviously would be to be able to meet more investors in the space and share our work. But the other is we've already learned so many things, tried a million approaches, and are starting to make it work. And the reason we are building this is the impact we can generate. And for me, it's very frustrating not having an efficient way of sharing with all the thousands of brands that we know exist. What works? Like, why do they have to go through the same learning curve? And we're starting to be invited like to boards of a few ones. And I've been out of meetings like we just saved them 3 years of mistakes and pain. But doing that at a bigger scale would be amazing. And something beautiful is there's more similarities between an artisan community in Tanzania, Indonesia, India, and Mexico than between an artisan community in Mexico and the city in Mexico. So most things that work in one country probably will work in another one. So I think there's a huge potential there, but we haven't found a way to do it efficiently.
That's a brilliant observation.
Artisan work is the work of the heart. And I think we need to revamp ecosystems to include artisans and everything.
We have time for one more question.
Amit.
Quick wrap up.
So looking at complementary care, does it make sense philanthropic fund? Because artisan is still a human being. He still has a family who expends on the health and the education. So if from the philanthropic side, these kind of care can be helpful for the artisan to reduce their cost of expense on health or education, will that make sense, artisan to becoming more viable?
That's a good question. I mean, certain companies, we know that Mellow Artisans was running, for example, certain types of healthcare and eye camps, particularly for those who were doing very fine work. So it seems like a very logical thing to do, but you'd have to have a wide-scale program to offer like basic kind of health kind of insurance programming or access to specific types of education for the children of these folks, of these families. I don't know of any such funders, programs that are systematic. Are you aware of examples of these, Stephen?
No.
I've never heard of that.
Mm-mm.
You'd think, I mean...
But yeah, I think it's part of the full picture. I think also it depends a lot on the country. In our case, there's a pretty simple way for people to become part of Social Security, but most artisans don't know it exists. So we help them do it, and it costs $5 per month to be part of it. But I know in other countries there's absolutely nothing. So yeah, I think it could be a helpful thing.
If we could each say one word as a kind of wrap up, if there was one thing you want people to leave the room with today, Stephen, Lubna, Antonia, what would it be? Call us. 2 words. What would it be? Collaborate.
One call to action.
One call to action.
Yes. Universal inclusion.
Universal inclusion.
I like
Lubna?
that. Universal inclusion. I say, please look for the artisans in your neighborhood. Look for artisan products, and in your companies, consider engaging artisans in your product lines and in components of it, because it's I think it's the best way to express each other.
Antonio?
Probably this idea of a SOCAP for the sector is what I would think would be amazing.
There's the Kula Conclave in Goa on December 4th and 5th. So that's a first step, but it's in India.
Yeah.
And we'll have
Taking
to we'll talk to the SOCAP organizers for next year. We'll do a side SOCAP focused just on this. Thank you all so much. Yeah, Artisan Cap. Thank you all so much for being here. This conversation could go so much deeper, and it's such an interesting area. So thank you all for being here.